And there's been kind of a red thread during the last talks. It's all about sound, with Craig, with the first What's Up. It's been audio, and as Joe's picture showed, you could do her interviews from a distance. There was always outside. But there is a group of journalists who can never stay home during these pandemics. They can never leave the crisis areas, and that is photojournalists. They will always need to be on the ground. And the next speaker we have is a photographer, is a journalist. Aryana Noroozi, she's a visual storyteller, digital artist, and photojournalist. She has a master's from the Columbian Graduate School of Publishing, has been published in the San Diego Union Tribunal, Los Angeles Times, and is a Pulitzer Prize Fellow. Her photographies are documenting her journey as a new photographer in the world of COVID. I give you Aryana Noroozi. Over to you.
Hi there, everybody. So I just want to thank you for having me. My name's Aryana Noroozi. I'm an American visual journalist. I'm based in Los Angeles, currently a little bit before 6 in the morning here, so bear with me. But thank you so much for having me. I was very excited to learn of this opportunity and to learn of the Global Risk Journalism Hub. And one of the things that really astounded me about the hub is, the deep commitment to connecting journalists across the field and beyond just the individual. So academia, students, professors, professionals, and different ages. And I think that that's very important and removing this barrier of who seems far away. So it's really cool to be able to talk to all of you across the globe. And I'm really thankful to be here. So I wanted to share a bit about my experience as a former Columbia graduate student during COVID, as I'm sure it's kind of a similar experience as some of you other students went through, graduating during COVID and my work in photography since then. So so I'll begin with kind of my experience as a student. So I graduated in May 2020. That was, when COVID was we're just kind of getting started with COVID, if you could say that. I applied to Columbia with no background in journalism. I had some background in visual craft studies and film and photography, but no formal training in telling true stories. So I began the graduate school in the fall of 2019. To be honest, it was very challenging to jump into Columbia and start my studies and truly master, okay, what is it to tell a story on top of my visual craft. So in the second semester, when I was getting the hang of it, that's when COVID happened. And I was in the heart of the epidemic in the US at the time in New York City. So I left the city and continued the semester online in San Diego, California, where my parents live and where I'm originally from. So obviously COVID became the focus of our storytelling, I assume for all journalists at the point in time, and still is. So a lot of our professors wanted to keep our work focused on New York City, telling stories in New York City. So that was a bit challenging, obviously being far away, but I think it was realistic to the working environment, right? So if you're to continue covering the place that you're living or working in. But I also appreciate the professors who gave us this more creative control to report on this collective crisis that we're all experiencing. And they kind of said, look, we need to look at the uniqueness of the situation. It's not only the largest story and probably collective crisis we've experienced in our lifetime, but it does allow us to become closer to those across the world, across the country, even across the state at times in the US, we didn't necessarily consider stories and the similarities between these places. But, the journalists and professors and the kind of all those in the field that were saying look, we can get on Zoom, we can screen record interviews, we can photograph through windows, at the peak of COVID when we had no tests, we had really no idea what was going on, maybe not even PPE, how can we readjust and do this from home or do this safely? So I think that I learned the most in school from those professors that kind of taught us about being adaptable and having this fresh outlook. And and not sticking with the old. And I know that that's something that I'm sure the students here experienced with readapting to COVID and reporting from home. So just to keep it brief, in one of my courses with Daniel Alacron, he's the host and creator of Radio Ambulante on NPR. They focus on telling stories of Latin America. So I was in a course telling true stories in sound with him. And he was one of the professors that really opened the floor to creating stories from home, obviously, that were anything we wanted to work on. So shifting the focus from just New York City or a specific beat we were maybe planning to report on prior to COVID. He allowed us to kind of shift our focus. So I was in San Diego, 45 minutes away from Tijuana, Mexico, right on the border. So I started to look to some sources I had down there because I had focused my master's thesis on stories in the region. And I actually, I was wondering what's going on in these American factories, the maquiladoras in Mexico. So they're American factories producing American goods in Mexico with Mexican workers, obviously. So I told the story of a bus driver who was working at a maquiladora that was still open. This was March, April, May 2020. While everything was shut down in California and the US, these American factories were still open, sending Mexicans to work to produce American goods. We used WhatsApp voice memos. We conducted the interview entirely in Spanish, which I was very rusty in, but by the end I learned. My studio was in my closet. I did all my editing and producing on a laptop. So I know Dr. Maria explained that this is similar. Pretty much the students at Oslo and the other universities involved are doing the same thing. So I can sympathize, and I commend you guys because that is hard work and creative work. It puts your creativity to the test. So I think that the drastic contrast from the studio facilities that we were, I was anticipating using in Colombia that I had used for a couple months, and coming to, here we are in our houses across the world, working on this and working on Zoom. I think that it was quite an experience, but it also was a bit of a perspective check, like what stories are important. Like I was sitting in San Diego in lockdown, and 45 minutes away, right across the border, this man is working, and he didn't actually even know what COVID was. That was kind of one of the major parts of the story. He didn't know what COVID was until April 2020. And he continued working, going home to his family, not having proper PPE. So I think this opportunity to pause and think of different ways to report on a crisis is very important. I think it has value instead of pushing ahead and, looking for the next breaking news story when it's not really breaking news, right? We're just kind of caught into that title that's being pushed at us, right? And breaking news is extremely important to report on. But I think that taking the time to pause and really consider alternate realities that are occurring right outside your door, those are extremely important stories to tell too. So I was really just hoping with the small reach, right, that the student project had, maybe a few people in San Diego, in California, even in the US can realize, wow, like minutes away from us is another country, and, other people here are not being afforded the same luxury as us, but, they're working for American companies. So that was just one story that I was fortunate to be able to report and produce due to COVID from home. And that I think kind of having that the idea and the consideration that I took to report on this one individual is something that I continued post-graduation and throughout COVID, of course. So post-graduation, again, I kept my focus on this sort of storytelling, examining realities different than my own, but of course affected by COVID as well. So through Columbia, I applied through the Ground Truth Project Migration Fellowship. which was centered around COVID's impact on migration and resettlement, primarily refugees. Ground Truth is a wonderful organization. They're global. I highly recommend everyone check them out. They have reporters around the US and the world, and they focus on solutions journalism. So, not just looking at the problems, but also solutions, community initiatives, individual initiatives that pose problems or pose solutions to problems, and looking through the reporting if these solutions could be applied elsewhere in the world. So I felt like this fellowship was the perfect fit for me. I did quite a bit of work around migration, including my thesis project in Tijuana and San Diego. And I, applied and was eventually selected. And I think I will forever attribute the foundation of my professional journalism work to the support and mentorship that I received at Ground Truth, and kind of understanding the importance of voice in a story, from your largest source, your main source, to the smallest. I don't want to say smallest source, but a source offering background. Let's say just understanding the voice and stringing it long to one long narrative, right? To tell the story. So that was just something I learned from my editors. But through this fellowship, I spent 3 months last fall documenting 3 refugee families from Somalia, the Congo, and Burundi, and their experience with virtual education. So looking at what is it like for these refugee families who recently arrived here, who the parents don't speak any English, what is it like for their children to attend school online? Because, it's hard enough, right? We heard the whole nine yards from, everyone here, at least in the US, online school, very challenging. So what is it like for them? Excuse me, what does that additional layer of the refugee experience look like for students, right? So these families also had an intergenerational commitment to education. So many of the mothers were in English classes that went online, and one was even a university student herself. So that was very interesting. And I can share my photography. Is now good? You guys want me to share it right now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. So share my screen. Great access right now. I'm sorry about that.
Is everything okay on your end?
Yeah, I'm just, for some reason, on my settings. I normally can share my screen on here, but if you guys have the PowerPoint, I did send it to you. If you want to put it up, but if not, I can share the screen on here. Let's see. Do you mind putting it up? Is that okay?
We don't have that on this computer. We'll just run seeing the technical stuff and see if there is something wrong with the access. But try now.
Second, sorry.
No, we said in the beginning of this stream we might have technical issues, and you know what? We're gonna have technical issues. If we have to, we will have them multiple times.
Okay, let's see. Share screen. Happens, right? Zoom. Okay. Okay. Recording. I think I got it. Sorry, guys. Okay. I have to quit and reopen. I'm so sorry about that. Is that okay if I do that?
Was it the presentation that you sent with all the photos?
Yeah, I emailed actually an updated link like a couple hours ago as well. So it should be right on the thread in our email.
I think I have the old one I could share from my end. Just give me a second,
Okay.
I can share the old one, and then you just say next, and I will be a technical supporter.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Sorry.
There we go. Where is hvor er det presentert står han?
We have it. I can send it to you too.
There we go.
Awesome. Yes, okay. There's the first photo. So I can just speak while they're up, or you can just click through them. It's whatever your preference is.
Just tell me when I'm going to move to the next picture, or I could do
Okay.
it in an interval.
Okay. Yeah, so you can move to the next. Yeah, so this is one of the mothers. Actually, sorry, go back to the previous. I should probably explain. Sorry, guys. So this is one of the families. This is Famo on the left. She's the mother of Sadia on the right, who I believe was 7 at the time, 6 or 7. So she's actually the mother that is in university studies herself at UCSD, University of California, San Diego. And then the next picture, if you want to go ahead, please. So that is her studying on Zoom, if you can see in the background. And she has 2 children, and she is divorced and moved back with her parents, which is pretty untraditional within the Somalian culture, from my understanding. But, so she is, Fama was incredibly unique, and she would often watch her sisters who had 9 children. They would come to the house while she was in between classes herself. So right now was in a literature class in this photo, while her sister, I think like 7 of her children were there, as well as her two own children. So there was like 9 or 10 kids outside in her parents' home. So this is just what it was kind of her daily routine in the fall semester last year during COVID. And you can go to the next. Yes, so this is one of the other families from Burundi originally that I spent time with. And I forgot to mention, sorry guys, I spent time with them throughout the fall of 2020, so almost a year ago, for about 3 months throughout COVID. So, as I'm sure you know, there's a lot of ups and downs of COVID then, spikes, getting better, getting worse throughout the time. So I'll touch on safety in a minute, but that was the time period that this project was photographed. So this is a father. He just came home from work. He's a chef in a restaurant in San Diego. The project was shot, so forgot that. But so he just came home. He's checking on his newborn daughter. His 3 other children are home too. They just finished school. And you can go to the next, please. So this is Famo's children, the first photo. So she was in her university classes and the kids snuck outside. That's her niece taking photos of her daughter, and her other nieces climbing on the car before she called them back in and was very upset that they were outside while she was on Zoom in class. She's a photographer herself, so you can tell that her daughter, she's used to posing, and Famo does a lot of community work with her photography and telling stories of City Heights, which is her neighborhood, which is one of the most diverse communities in California. It's home to, the majority of refugees that come to San Diego County. And so they're playing outside after class. And you can skip to the next photo, please. Yeah, so this is the same family from 2 photos ago. The mother's name is Marie. So this was in the evening while they were waiting for dinner to cook. They actually ate dinner pretty late, like 8 or 9 p.m. by the time that dad was home from work and everyone was done with school. So they're just playing around, playing some Jenga, passing the time. And that is the same mother, Marie. She's holding their newborn baby. The time the baby was 3 months, I want to say. So she had her hands literally full while her other children were in online school. She previously worked in daycare through a community organization that's very focused on the education of refugee students. And they connected her with a job in daycare, but obviously with COVID, she was out of work. So she's home with the children. And this is just Famo and her father talking while her son is in the back playing Fortnite, video games, and her niece is doing online school. That's Consolata. She was the 3rd mother I worked with. Her daughter is playing a crossword puzzle. It was U.S. state fish, which I thought was interesting. And they were just having dinner, the two of them. She had 7 other daughters, so they were throughout the house. Some were home, some weren't. They all are doing school in the house. And she was in her ESL class, actually, Consolata. She's on her laptop, English learning class. And that's also Consolata's family. There's a few of them, doing school from home here in the living room. And that is Famo and her children. They were picking up their San Diego Unified School District offers 3 meals a day. Pickup at that time, school was virtual. So we were in the story also looking at the intersection of food security and education and what not being in school meant for many students. Luckily, that the San Diego Unified School District offered these meals. So that was one of their pushes, was really to make sure that food security wasn't an issue for their students. And then, we can stop sharing. That was from my next project, which I'll touch on, but I think I was going to really share too many photographs from that yet. Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. I'm glad you guys got to see the photos. There were quite a few more than I planned to share, so sorry about that, but I'm glad you got to see them. Probably inform the project a bit more. So yeah, from this piece, I really kind of hope to address the misconception that once refugees make it to American soil, that their problems are solved. There are so many hurdles, right, in the process of seeking refuge from your entire family being born in refugee camps, which was the case for all these families besides the newborn, obviously. So from that to the extensive screening process where one person's turned away and you have to continue reapplying, and then to arriving here with no linguistic or cultural similarities, and then your children are growing up in American culture. So that is hard. And I really hope the takeaway could touch on the extra hurdles that these families tackle and show also the nitty gritty, like, okay, so virtual education is hard. Now imagine watching 11 children and being a university student yourself and trying to be in class and make sure your kids are in class and, doing things within your 15-minute breaks and your lunch. And the next thing you know, it's like 8 p.m. and it's been dark since 4 and you have your kids in your small house. So there was like a lot, obviously I observed and documented. And of course in the edit, 8 to 10 photos make it in. But this project was really immense, I think, to my understanding and, my little bit of growth as a novice, early career visual journalist. And I think it's really important that I had this experience. And these mothers, they're really killing it. They're doing an incredible job. And I wanted, readers and viewers to see how hard they're working every day, because I'm like really, really proud of them. And the story was published in the San Diego Union Tribune. It's also part of the Here to Stay series with the Ground Truth Migration Fellows, which I recommend checking out. There are some other incredible stories from the other fellows that worked on the Migration Fellowship as well, all centered around COVID. So yeah, I think with the time we have left, I definitely want to talk first about meeting sources and building trust during COVID, and then some safety stuff. So for this project in particular, it was difficult to find families. This was starting about a year ago, last July or August. So COVID, at that point, we were just sort of getting testing. There was obviously no vaccine, and testing was somewhat difficult to come about still at that time. So I had a lot of trouble, pushback, and just almost sheer impossibility for me as a novice photojournalist coming in to finding families originally. But it took a lot of pre-production work, really knowing what it is I wanted, what is my story, like with any kind of journalism, but especially visual, just being super upfront. My plan is to show XYZ. It's going to probably take this much time. I want to tell the story because of this reason, but I'm eager. Obviously, it's you find the real reason when you meet the sources, because it's their story. So I met some an incredible community organization with an incredible community organizer, Dan. He was from Kenya himself, so he had ties to the refugee community, and this community organization was based primarily around education. So all of the families that were a part of the project were a part of this organization, and they were already very proactive with their children's education. So they wanted to talk, right? And I think that's really important. If I could offer any advice, is kind of look towards the people that are, community organizations they want, that are centered around the topic you're looking for. Like, they want to talk, they want to share your story. So I think that share their stories. So I think that makes things a bit, I don't want to say easier, but you find a place to definitely meet halfway, right? To kind of figure out what you think the story might be, and why you're curious. And these organizations can really open the door to tell you, okay, well, here's a family, and then your reporting just begins. Like, you think the story is one thing, it's going to be another, right? And that's the beautiful part. That's the point of journalism, I suppose. So we met on Zoom originally. I had a slideshow of kind of my purpose behind the project, and the questions I had and what I was looking to explore. And Dan, he translated it all to their native language on Zoom. So he would mute me and he would talk. It was a very interesting experience, and an awesome capability that I guess that Zoom brought us. So, kind of all realizing we're not that different, right? We can build trust the same or similar ways across cultures. We chat. Eventually, the next time I spoke one more time with them, and then they invited me to their homes. And I went there twice without my camera. A lot of times, you can just go once and you're very clear with what you're doing. Pull out your camera then. But I just wanted to make them very comfortable. So I went to the three families' house twice. And then after the third time, pulled out my camera and started going there once or twice a week for almost 3 months. And, I think that comes with the job. I'm a very, I'd say, relaxed person. I don't mind, sitting on the floor at someone's house for hours, or sitting at the table eating dinner with them. And that's kind of the fly on the wall approach that I think is important in all types of journalism, but especially documentary photography and video. So again, like I said, too, if someone is eager to share their story, they're going to share it. So it's just about mitigating and minimizing and understanding the risks. Again, like, some people in organizations might be weary to open up and to share, if at all, while other people are going to be completely open and open their home from the get-go. But at that point, it's all about just following the health precautions. And so touching on that, with everything changing so fast, but also kind of staying the same with COVID, right? My advice and what I did was, of course, masks, hand sanitizer, washing my hands constantly, showering as soon as I got home. And at that point, during Ground Truth, the fellowship, the tests were coming a little bit more readily available. So I was getting tested, and I was fortunate I was able to do that, as much as I could. But, I won't lie, I did feel nervous going in people's homes. I did feel nervous coming back into my parents, but thankfully with the vaccine, at least some further protection is offered. But it's still, to this day, wearing masks in the house. A lot of times sources, and I had this back then, they didn't even want to wear masks, which, you can't force anyone, but just do what you can. It's tough. It's a tough space, and I'm sure you all have encountered different things, but COVID had the ups and downs throughout the project. It started getting really bad again when I was wrapping up in December. So if I was continuing to photograph, I think Ground Truth would have, I'm pretty sure for the people that were still working on projects, they had to do things outdoors. So there's, of course, creative ways to do that, photographing through windows, photographing outside. And that was one of the beautiful things I think about COVID, was really leaning into that creativity on the photography side, and kind of how do you make your pictures in an untraditional way, because we can't can't do that right now, right? So of course the vaccine makes things easier, but their sources might not be vaccinated, their loved ones might not be. So just continuing masking up and being as communicative and upfront as possible, and really understanding their comfortability levels, and of course maintaining yours, and working with the publication you're working with and really understanding their rules and they offer. I think that's the best place to go for guidance, of course, because they're gonna have their rules and regulations and be able to help you out with your project. So yeah, and I guess to kind of finish up, I'd like to speak about my experience as an early career photographer and writer during COVID. So I didn't plan to go into photojournalism from a young age or even college. It was something I really fell in love with in grad school and found opportunities in. Of course, it is challenging to find something permanent and financially supportive. Like, I work in other creative industries and jobs to fully support myself when I don't have fellowships. And so from my understanding prior to COVID, it was still difficult to find gigs that aren't completely freelance in photojournalism, at least in the United States. But fellowships are wonderful. They kind of allow that creative freedom and mentorship while being supported financially and, again, mentorship wise. And like tips that I definitely learned and tricks from home during COVID was always looking at other photographers' work, any sort of visual reference, watching shows, films, documentaries, of course, Pinterest. I'm an artist myself. I do digital art as well. So really studying all kinds of visual arts. I think that COVID also, I'm grateful for the time I've had during COVID to really look at, again, all sorts of art, maybe even as well as music, right? And kind of think about the emotions that this art evokes from me, and kind of think about my own work and what emotions do I want to evoke. And I had wonderful advice from a mentor. She's an incredible photographer, Brittany Greason. And she told me, like, what makes you angry? Like, look into that for inspiration for your stories. So looking at injustices and what kind of questions you have about those injustices. Maybe it's positive emotions. Like, what questions do you have about those emotions, and kind of starting and examining those emotion questions are a great place to find stories. I think that that's what the goal is, right? Is to put a question on the table, explore it through your reporting, and leave your viewers with something. And that, for the majority, is emotions, right? So going back to COVID, kind of having that time to reflect and think about, okay, why do I want to do this? What is the reason behind the story? It's obviously not yourself as a journalist. So taking the time to pause and do that, I've been really grateful for, and to have that early on in my career. And lastly, my current work, we just have a minute left. I'm working on a Pulitzer grant through the Pulitzer Center Crisis Reporting Fellowship for postgraduates. And my story is about a mother beating the odds of addiction within her community. She lives in Pekin, Illinois. She witnessed addiction. That's in the Midwest, for those that are unfamiliar, in America. And so she witnessed addiction growing up in her own home. She lost a former loved one. And then last year during COVID, she lost her 18-year-old daughter. And her daughter left behind a son, her grandson. I found this mother and her story. Originally, I wanted to explore COVID's impact on addiction, but later on, I realized the story is actually about what this mother's overcome and the trajectory of her life and her resilience. So I was living in Chicago when I was reporting this, and it was about a 4-hour drive. So I was only able to go out there and spend 2 full days with the family. So that, as a photographer, was a bit challenging, but going back and actually writing the story and making my selects on photos, I realized the story is not just COVID's impact on addiction, but it's this mother's story. So pivoting stories, I think as an early career journalist, just realizing that the focus of your story is going to pivot. And that was a bit challenging for me at first, but with speaking with mentors and more experienced journalists, I realized this is something that happens all the time. So I'm thankful for the Pulitzer Center to give me that flexibility and the time and the resources to work on this grant. So we'll share that when it's published. But I think that's all, guys. So thank you.
It's been quite wonderful to listen. I just have some questions I want to ask you before we end this. And that is, you said you were quite new as a photographer out in the field. How has that been with COVID, kind of mentorships and stuff like that? How has that been affected by COVID?
Yeah, well, definitely mentorships. It's interesting to think that a lot of the conversations and interactions could have been in person, but that's okay. I've been connected with wonderful people across the country that I think maybe had a little bit more time, or since everything was moved remotely, they had time in their schedule, right, to speak with me. And of course, mentors that I have that, we talk all the time as well. But I think that the distance and the everything being remote had its challenges, but it also had its perks in that sense. Being able to connect with people all over. Just again, finding creative ways to hone in on your craft and your style. Obviously, thankfully, you can shoot. I was shooting every day during COVID when we were locked down, like just in my neighborhood, in my house, but also having the internet. We're extremely lucky this COVID happened when we had the internet, because it's possible to study other photographers' work. And like I said, paintings, even other visual art that really give you visual references on how to compose and make quality images.
So to build on that, how do you think COVID have affected photojournalism?
I think that, yeah, right. I definitely think that it created some barriers initially, but I think that the work that photographers are producing since obviously during COVID still is incredible. I think that it has caused people to think a little deeper and higher and around obstacles like shooting indoors, like social distancing, like the concepts and the stories that we're actually photographing now. There's so many creative ways, right? There's a lot of stories on mental health during COVID, losing, a family member to COVID, or let's say addiction, and creative ways to photograph that. I think there's been a lot of emptiness in photography, and that's been something we've been, at least I've been seeing in stories, like be it by death or loss, right? So I think finding creative ways to photograph emotions, kind of what I was talking about earlier, if it made sense, like the emotions, finding ways to make emotions into photographs, that's been really creative to see.
Kind of getting a bit in touch with kind of the process. And I think I will share the PowerPoint. Kind of what is your thought process? You're working through this, kind of going back to what Joe said earlier with kind of traumatizing, getting close to family. How do you kind of think about framing and being intrusive when you are in somebody's home during what is like a crisis like this? What's kind of the thoughts that go through you as a technical photographer? I can just share the pictures so we can just speak about them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so it was definitely my first professional assignment or project, not assignment, project, was during COVID, about COVID, virtual learning. So it's interesting to think that, wow, that was really like the first project I took on, right? In people's homes during a pandemic, about something so granular, like they're doing school online, right? Kind of in their face. I think at first, I'd get a little, I still do right before I go to shoot. I think a lot of people get the jitters, but once you get in there, I mean, I wasn't thinking about it too much, right? You're so entrenched in the story. But I wanted to make images that reflected this confinement, right? Being in this small space, you day after day is the same thing. School online, everything's remote online. You're not really going anywhere. So I tried to convey that in my images, like here, being outdoor, this sort of kind of sense of freedom, simply just being outside their porch. Um, Whereas the other photos were kind of shot tight and up close and personal. If that answers your question. If there's anything I missed with that topic, I don't know.
Because I kind of feel that with the picture is that kind of emptiness, that meter you have to step back to take that picture you're talking about. Have you felt it was kind of hard to do that cross culture? Because you did speak about, traveling down south and speaking Spanish in a new culture. How was kind of this kind of a global crisis, but also that cultural difference? How did that affect you when you were traveling and visiting kind of different people?
Definitely a cultural difference. Famo here on the left, she speaks English. She's, in her late 20s, university student, but the other mothers didn't speak any English. But, we communicated, I don't know, somehow, great as day. We were, I think a smile, smile and laughter goes a long way. It is interesting to think like, wow, I was in these mothers' homes and we really could not speak the same language. Like we had Dan, the community health worker, to community organizer, to kind of help communicate, but he wasn't there after the first meeting. So on WhatsApp, I'm sure maybe a child would help them out with what I was saying, or they'd run it in a translator. They spoke, minimal English, but I didn't really think about it too much. As interesting as that is, I just felt so comfortable with them. And I think they felt the same with me. And, I can't thank them enough for that, for this being my first experience and first major project, because it really has given me the confidence to, at least behind the camera, I'm still learning a lot and I'm still learning a lot of technical things, but kind of building that trust with your sources and getting it done in whatever way you do. Obviously the right way, but I think it's just about being an open person and being transparent with what you're doing, your intentions, why you want to do it, which has to do with them. You're literally looking at them and, asking them, why is this important to them? Why do they want to do it? And that's the reason you're telling the story.
I also want to ask a bit about your process, because I really love this picture, kind of the framing, the light, the colors. Are you kind of a fly on the wall? Do you frame? How do you kind of go ahead and capture these gripping moments, these feelings as you were talking about? How is that process in your head when you're thinking about the framing and stuff like that?
So definitely a fly on the wall style. I do study a lot of composition, like I said, through visual references, be it paintings, all sorts of art online. I study a lot of other photographers' work, just that's sent along to me, or that by following on Instagram, or just reading different various publications. So I think that really helps my eye subconsciously. Since I've taken these photos, since it's been close to a year for some of them, and 9 months for the others throughout the span that I was shooting, I definitely think my work has improved. I'm far more conscious and cognizant of making images, in a sense that I'm thinking about the place, maybe even drawing it out when I go home and okay, how am I going to make this? What time of day am I going to go here with the sun? And a lot of these images I did, I had some loose framework of that sort, but I was there so often that, you're sitting somewhere for hours and you're a photographer, right? That's why you're there and you have your camera. But, naturally, if I'm ever somewhere, I'm waiting at the Department of Motor Vehicles. That's what we call it in the US. Super boring, right? I have my iPhone. I'm sitting there like thinking, how can I make photos? I'm just waiting. If the sun's hitting through a window in a certain way, I'm taking photographs just for fun. So I think that it's having that mindset on top of obviously preparation and factoring in what do you want this image to say? Because your camera it's not a reporting tool, it's a storytelling tool. So you already know, the foundation of your story, if not the full thing, when you're there shooting.
And kind of as a last question, I really want to ask you, we talked about the vaccines are coming, we're returning slowly to more normal, or at least the new normal. What would be an advice you would tell a younger self, like yourself 1 year ago? What would be the question or the advice you would give for the pandemic that has been happening? What's the one advice as a photographer you would give a younger self?
Oh my gosh.
Again, them easy questions.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, there's probably a lot of things, but I would really say to take advantage of the time you have in the places you're shooting. You know, back then, the next day cases would spike and they would go down again, then they would go up, and it was just a trend upwards, as everyone knows, throughout the fall and winter. So really just as a photographer, taking advantage of the time you have with your sources in the space, and doing as much pre-production mapping as you can. I know that doesn't work for everyone. I never like drew out shots and shot the exact same thing, but it had my mind working. So there's always preparation, even when you don't think there is.
And I think that's a wonderful way of kind of ending it, saying that take your time. I think that's a red thread through the whole talk. If you're doing audio, if you're doing pictures, are we talking with somebody in trauma, take your time and actually appreciate what you have been given and what you're giving back. So I just want to say thank you. Where can people see your work when it's coming out?
I will share with Dr. Maria my Pulitzer link, and then I can also share with you the Ground Truth Here to Stay link. I think that's really interesting.
We would love
you guys
that.
might enjoy that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You.
Stina?
Oh, well, that concludes this seminar. That was the last one. So now all we have to do is really thank all of the wonderful speakers, and to all of you, there weren't that many, but to those who asked questions, and to those who just wanted to listen. And we hope that this seminar has provided some inspiration to just go out into the world and make something of your own.
Yeah, and we hope that you have learned all you need to know to maybe go out and try it for yourself. And remember, it really does not have to be perfect on the first try.
Or the second.
Or the third. We feel very privileged to be able to work with Global Risk Journalism Hub, and for them giving us the chance to produce something of our own.
And if you're interested in what the Global Risk Journalism Hub is, you can visit them on their website, Global Risk Journalism Hub, in one word.com, or listen to the podcast, Global Risk Journalism Podcast. We would also like to thank those who made this production possible, the Global Risk Journalism Hub, Oslo Met, and the Journalism and Media International Center.
And of course, we have to thank our producer, Associate Professor Maria Konovlund, and our technician who made this stream run smoothly.
We truly hope that you leave this seminar inspired to create something journalistic content on your own.
Bye.
Bye.
And
Have a great weekend.